I didn't know I had children until they walked past my car and looked exactly like me. The city lights blurred against the tinted window as the engine idled. A low, controlled hum beneath the silence between us. Victoria was saying something about the guest list, about seating arrangements, about a future that had already been decided in rooms I owned, but I wasn't listening, not anymore, because across the street, under a flickering street lamp, I saw her, Emily Carter, 5 years older, 5 years gone, 5 years buried in a past I had forced myself to forget, and she wasn't alone. Her hand was wrapped around two small ones, twins, boys, maybe 4 years old, maybe 5, I couldn't tell. Time did something strange when your past decided to walk back into your life like it had never left. My fingers tightened slightly against the leather seat, subtle, controlled, but enough for Victoria to notice. She paused mid-sentence, her voice trailing into the quiet. Adrian, she asked, soft but sharp, the way people speak when they realize something has shifted. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because one of the boys turned his head, just slightly, just enough for the streetlight to catch his face, and everything inside me went still. Not fear, not confusion, something colder, something precise, recognition. It hit like memory without permission, the shape of his eyes, the angle of his jaw, the way his expression held a kind of quiet observation that didn't belong to a child. I had seen that look before. Every morning, every mirror. Emily followed his gaze, her eyes finding mine through the glass, and for a second, just a second, the world narrowed to that moment. No traffic, no noise, no future, just the past staring back at me. Her grip tightened on the boy's hands. I saw it, the instinct, the decision. She turned, quick, controlled, pulling them gently but firmly away, like distance could erase what had already happened. Who is that? Victoria's voice cut through again, sharper now. I exhaled slowly, measured, my eyes still locked on the empty space where Emily had been. No one, I said. But the word felt wrong the second it left my mouth, because no one doesn't look at you like they remember everything. No one doesn't walk away like they're protecting something. I reached forward, tapping lightly against the divider. The driver straightened instantly, waiting. Follow them, I said, my voice calm, steady, the kind that didn't leave room for questions. Victoria turned toward me fully now, confusion, then something else, something calculating. Adrian, what is this about? I didn't look at her, not yet, because outside, across the street, the shadows had already swallowed them, but the image stayed, burned in with impossible clarity. 2 boys, identical, and one of them had my eyes. It's about something that was never finished, I said quietly, more to myself than to her, and as the car eased forward into the flow of traffic, I realized something I hadn't felt in years, not power, not control, something far more dangerous, uncertainty, because if what I saw was real, then the life I thought I was building wasn't mine. It was something I had stepped into while my real life kept walking, growing, breathing, somewhere without me, and I had just seen it for the first time. The car moved slowly through traffic, but my attention stayed fixed on the sidewalk ahead, searching for a glimpse of them again, as if losing sight for even a second might make them disappear completely. Adrian, you are not going to ignore me, Victoria said, her tone controlled but no longer soft. I could feel her eyes on me, measuring, calculating, trying to understand a version of me she had never seen before. I leaned back slightly, my gaze still forward. I am not ignoring you, I said evenly. I am thinking. The words were true, but not complete, because thinking felt too small for what was happening inside my head. This was reconstruction, recalculation, 5 years of absence suddenly demanding explanation. The driver slowed as the crowd thickened near the next intersection, and then I saw them again. Emily had stopped near a crosswalk, kneeling slightly to adjust one of the boys' jackets, her movements careful, practiced, the kind of quiet attention that comes from doing everything alone. My chest tightened in a way I did not expect, not anger, not regret, something unfamiliar, something that did not fit into the structure of control I had built my life on. The second boy tugged at her sleeve, pointing toward a street vendor, his voice faint through the glass but enough to carry a single word, Mom, simple, ordinary, but it landed heavier than anything I had heard in years. Victoria followed my line of sight now, her posture shifting as she finally saw what I saw. Her silence stretched for a moment, then, you know her, she said, not a question. I did not answer immediately, because Emily stood up then, and for a brief second, she looked directly at the car again, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, they held something I recognized instantly, not fear, not surprise, expectation, as if she had always known this moment would come. The boys turned with her, and again, that impossible reflection stared back at me, one of them tilting his head slightly, the same way I used to when I was trying to understand something without asking questions. My jaw tightened. Adrian, Victoria pressed, sharper now. Who is she? I finally turned to her, just enough to meet her gaze. Someone who was not supposed to come back, I said quietly. Her expression hardened almost instantly, the pieces falling into place faster than I expected. An ex, she concluded, and I said nothing, which was answer enough. Outside, the light changed, and Emily took the boy's hands again. guiding them across the street, away from us, away from everything I had built. Stay with them, I said to the driver, my voice low but firm. The car rolled forward, maintaining distance, controlled, unseen. Victoria let out a quiet breath, something between disbelief and irritation. This is not how tonight was supposed to go, she said. I almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. No, I replied, watching as the three figures moved through the crowd, blending into the city. It is not. And as they turned the corner and disappeared again, I felt it settle into certainty. This was not coincidence, this was not closure. This was something unfinished, something that had been waiting for me to notice, and now that I had, there was no version of my life that could continue without answers, because those boys were not just part of her story, they were part of mine, whether she wanted me in it or not. They turned the corner, and I felt something in me refuse to let that be the end of it. Stop the car, I said, already reaching for the door handle before the vehicle had fully slowed. The driver reacted instantly, pulling to the curb with precision. Victoria's voice followed me, sharper now. Adrian, this is not necessary, but I was already stepping out into the night air. The city noise rushing back in like a reminder that everything else was still moving, even if my world had just shifted off its axis. I adjusted my jacket without thinking, grounding myself in routine, control, but my eyes were already scanning ahead, catching sight of Emily and the boys just as they reached the next block. They were not running, not hiding, just moving with purpose, like this was their normal, like I was the disruption. I closed the distance quickly but without drawing attention. Years of moving through crowded spaces unnoticed, guiding every step, until I was close enough to hear them clearly. One of the boys laughed, light, unguarded, and it hit me again, that strange, unfamiliar weight in my chest. Emily slowed slightly, just enough to let me catch up. She did not turn immediately, which told me everything I needed to know. She knew I was there. She had known the moment our eyes met back at the intersection. Emily, I said, her name leaving my mouth for the first time in 5 years. It felt different, heavier, like it carried everything we never finished. She stopped then, the boys pausing with her, and for a second, the city seemed to quiet around us. She turned slowly, her expression composed, almost calm, but her eyes, they were sharper now, more guarded than I remembered. Adrian, she replied, my name steady on her lips, like it had not been buried, like it had been waiting. The boys looked between us, curious, observant, the one on her right stepping slightly closer to her side, instinctive, protective in a way that did not belong to a child. I crouched down slightly, lowering myself to their level without breaking eye contact with her. You did not tell me, I said quietly, not accusing, not yet, just stating the truth as I saw it. Her jaw tightened just enough to notice. There was nothing to tell, she answered, too quickly, too clean. I glanced at the boys again, really looking this time, the details aligning with a precision I could not ignore. Their height, their age, the timing, everything pointed to a truth she was trying to keep out of reach. They are about 4, I said, my voice measured, controlled, maybe 5. Her silence stretched, and that was answer enough. One of the boys tilted his head again, studying me with a focus that felt unsettlingly familiar. Mom, who is he? He asked softly. Emily's hand tightened around his, just slightly. No one you need to worry about, she said, but her voice lacked the certainty it should have had. I stood slowly, my gaze returning to hers. That is not true, I said, my tone still calm, but something beneath it shifting, something she recognized immediately, because I saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened, in the way she positioned herself just a little more between me and them. Adrian, this is not a conversation we are having here, she said, her voice lower now, controlled but strained. I nodded once, acknowledging the truth in that, but not accepting her boundary. Then we will have it somewhere else, I replied, a statement, not a question. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she held my gaze, weighing options, calculating outcomes, the same way I was, except this time, we were not negotiating business, we were negotiating something far more complicated, because standing between us were 2 lives that had been built without me, and I was not walking away from that again, not without knowing exactly what had been taken, and why. Emily's eyes held mine for a long second, and I could see the calculation behind them, the same kind I had built my entire world on, except hers was different, quieter, shaped by years of protecting something instead of controlling it. Not tonight, she said finally, her voice firm but low, like she was trying to keep the moment from expanding beyond what she could manage. One of the boys shifted closer to her, his small hand tightening around her coat, watching me like he was trying to understand why his mother's heartbeat had just changed. I straightened fully, letting the silence stretch just enough to make my next words land with weight. You do not get to decide that alone, I said, calm, controlled, but unmistakable. Her expression flickered for just a second, not fear, not exactly, but recognition. She knew that tone, she remembered what it meant when I stopped asking and started stating. I already did, she replied, and there it was, the line she had drawn 5 years ago still standing between us, invisible but solid. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay measured. because pushing too hard right now would only make her retreat further, and I needed her to stay, to answer, to stop moving away from something that was already catching up to both of us. Then explain it to me, I said, my voice quieter now, more deliberate. Explain why I am standing here looking at two children who should not exist without me knowing. Her jaw tightened again, and this time she did not look away. You do not get to rewrite history because it is inconvenient, she said, and there was something sharper underneath her words now, something that had been building long before tonight. I took a step closer, not enough to crowd her, just enough to close the distance between what we were and what we had been. I am not rewriting anything, I said. I am asking why. You erased me from it. The boys glanced between us again, the tension finally reaching them. One of them tugged lightly at her sleeve. Mom, he whispered, uncertain now. Emily's hand moved instinctively, brushing his hair back in a gesture so familiar it hit me harder than anything she had said, because I had never seen it before, and that realization settled deeper than anything else. I had missed all of it, every moment, every first, every small detail that should have been mine to witness. She looked down at them, then back at me, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, not just control, not just distance, but conflict, like she was standing between two versions of her life and refusing to let them collide. They are safe, she said quietly, like that was the only answer that mattered. I held her gaze, steady, unyielding. Safe from what? I asked, because that word carried weight, implication, a reason bigger than absence. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. The answer caught somewhere between what she wanted to protect and what she could no longer hide. The city moved around us, people passing, lights shifting, but none of it touched the space we were standing in. Because this was not about the past anymore, it was about what she had chosen to do with it. From your world, she said finally, the words soft but heavy, and I felt something in me shift again, not denial, not anger, something closer to understanding, but not acceptance, not yet, because whatever reason she believed in, whatever decision she made, they had consequences, and I was standing in front of them, looking back at me with my own eyes. You made that decision for me, I said, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. You decided I would not choose them. She shook her head slightly, a small, almost imperceptible movement. No, she said, I decided they would not have to pay for your choices, and there it was, the truth she had been carrying, not just hidden, but protected, and for the first time since I saw them, I realized this was not just about what she had taken from me, it was about what she believed she had saved them from, and that made everything more complicated than I had planned for. Her words stayed between us longer than they should have, heavy in a way that did not fade when the moment passed. I watched her closely, not just what she said, but how she held herself, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hand never loosened around theirs, like she had been expecting this conversation for years and still was not ready for it. You think I would have made them pay, I said quietly, not defensive, just trying to understand the version of me she had built in her mind. Emily did not hesitate this time, which told me everything. I think you would have done what you always do, she replied, her voice steady. You would have protected them your way, and your way comes with a cost. I let out a slow breath, my gaze shifting briefly to the boys again. They were watching us now with more focus, more awareness, the curiosity starting to turn into something else, something that asked questions they did not yet have the words for. One of them stepped slightly forward, just a few inches, but enough to show he was not afraid, just cautious. I noticed everything, the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence that did not belong to his age. And something in me responded to it instinctively, like recognition was not just visual, it was deeper, ingrained. I crouched down again, slower this time, more deliberate, making sure my movements did not startle them. What are your names? I asked, my voice softer now, stripped of command, just a question. Emily inhaled slightly, like she was about to stop me, but she did not this time. The boy closest to me hesitated, glancing up at her, waiting for permission. She gave the smallest nod, barely there, but enough. Liam, he said quietly, then motioned to his brother, and this is Noah. The names settled into place in my mind instantly, solid, real. I nodded once, committing them to memory like they had always been there. Liam and Noah, I repeated, and something about saying it out loud made it impossible to deny any longer. I looked back at Emily. You gave them names I would have chosen, I said, not accusing, just stating what I recognized. Her expression shifted just slightly, like I had touched something she had not expected me to notice. You do not get to claim that, she said, but her voice was quieter now, less certain. I stood up slowly again, meeting her gaze. I am not claiming anything, I replied. I am seeing what is already there. The street light above us flickered once, casting shadows that moved across all of us, like the moment itself could not stay still. I glanced down at the boys again, at the way they stood close to her but kept looking at me, trying to understand why this stranger felt familiar. Do they know? I asked, my voice lower now, more careful. Emily shook her head immediately. No, she said, firm, final, they do not. I nodded slowly, processing that. because it meant this was not just about what she had taken from me, it was about what she had built in my absence, a version of their lives where I did not exist at all. And what happens when they ask, I said, because they will. She looked down at them again, then back at me, and for the first time, there was something in her eyes that had not been there before, not control, not distance, something closer to uncertainty. I will tell them what they need to. No, she said, but it sounded less like a plan and more like a hope. I studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, decisive. That is not enough anymore, I said quietly, and I could feel the shift as the words settled, because this was no longer just her decision, not after tonight, not after I had seen them. We are not done here, I added, my tone calm but unmovable, and the truth of it hung between us, unavoidable now, because whether she wanted it or not, whatever she had built without me had just changed, and there was no version of this where I walked away again. The silence after my words did not break, it settled, heavy and unavoidable, and I could see the moment Emily realized there was no simple way to end this anymore, no clean exit like 5 years ago. The boys shifted slightly beside her, sensing something they could not yet understand. Liam looked up at me again, his eyes steady, curious in a way that made it impossible to pretend this was nothing. Mom, he said softly, are we going home? The word home landed differently now, because I did not know where that was, not for them, not for her. Emily nodded quickly, almost too quickly. Yes, she said, her voice gentle as she brushed her hand over his shoulder, grounding him, but her eyes flickered back to me immediately, sharp, guarded. This ends here tonight, she added, quieter now, meant only for me. I held her gaze, unmoving. No, I said simply, not louder, not harsher, just certain, because the truth was already out, and there was no version of it that could be pushed back. Into silence, a car passed behind me, headlights cutting briefly across the sidewalk, and in that light, I saw it more clearly than before, the exhaustion she carried, not just from tonight, but from years of holding this alone, from building a life that had no room for me, and still, I could not accept it, not without understanding every piece she had decided for both of us. Then what do you want, Adrian, she asked, and this time there was no deflection, no attempt to redirect, just the question, direct and unavoidable. I exhaled slowly, choosing my words with more care than I usually allowed myself. I want the truth, I said, all of it, not pieces, not decisions made without me. She looked away for a moment, just a second, but it was enough to tell me how much she had buried, how much she had chosen not to revisit. Noah shifted closer to her side, his small hand tightening in her coat, mirroring the tension in her posture. We cannot do this here, she said again, but there was less resistance in it now, more acknowledgement than refusal. I nodded once, agreeing with that part at least. Then tell me where, I replied, immediate, because I was not giving her space to disappear again. She hesitated, her eyes moving briefly down the street, calculating distance, time, options, the same way she used to when things were uncertain. Tomorrow, she said finally, 10 in the morning, her voice steadier now, like setting a boundary she could control. There is a café on West 12th Street. I watched her carefully, measuring whether this was another escape or a real answer. Then I nodded, slow and deliberate. I will be there, I said, and I meant it in a way that did not leave room for change. The boys glanced between us again, sensing the shift, the temporary resolution. Liam stepped slightly forward once more, closer than before, his gaze fixed on me. Are you coming too? He asked, not to Emily, but to me. The question caught something in my chest I did not expect, something quiet but sharp. I held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Yes, I said, my voice lower now, more certain than anything I had said all night. I am coming. Emily's breath caught just slightly at that. I saw it, even if she tried to hide it, because she understood what that meant, not just for tomorrow, but for everything after. This was not a conversation that would end in one meeting, not anymore. She adjusted her grip on their hands, then stepped back, creating distance again, but not as much as before, not enough to pretend I was not part of this anymore. Tomorrow, she repeated, and then she turned, guiding them down the sidewalk, away from me. But slower this time, like she knew I was still watching, like she knew I was not going anywhere. I stayed where I was, the city moving around me again, the noise returning, but it all felt distant now, because for the first time in years, something real had cut through the structure of control I had built, and it was not something I could manage with decisions or distance. It was something that required answers, and for once, I was not the one holding them. I did not follow them when they walked away, not because I could not, but because for the first time in years, I understood that control would not get me what I needed here. Answers would, and answers required patience, something I had never needed before. I stood there for a moment longer, watching until they disappeared completely into the rhythm of the city, until there was nothing left to track, nothing left to calculate, just absence again. But this time it felt different, this time it was temporary. I turned back toward the car slowly, my thoughts already shifting, reorganizing, building a new structure around something I had not planned for. The driver opened the door without a word, and as I stepped inside, the controlled silence of the interior returned, but it did not feel the same. Victoria was still there, exactly where I had left her, but her posture had changed, more rigid, more alert, her eyes fixed on me with a level of intensity that matched what I had just experienced. "You are not going to pretend that did not happen," she said, her voice calm but tight. I settled into the seat, adjusting my cuff slightly, a small, habitual motion to regain control. "I was not planning to," I replied, meeting her gaze evenly. She studied me for a long moment, searching for something beneath the surface, something she could understand. "You have children," she said finally, the words deliberate, like she needed to hear them out loud to make them real. I did not answer immediately, because saying it would shift everything in a way that could not be undone, but silence was already an answer, and we both knew it. She let out a quiet breath, something between disbelief and realization. "And you did not know," she added, and this time I shook my head once, slow, controlled. "No," I said, the truth simple but heavy. The car began to move again, pulling away from the curb, but my focus remained on the conversation unfolding inside it, not the city passing outside. Victoria leaned back slightly, crossing her arms, a gesture I had seen before when she was recalculating her position. "This changes things," she said, and there was no emotion in it, just fact. I nodded once, because she was right, it did, in ways neither of us had prepared for. "Yes," I replied, my tone just as measured. She looked at me again, sharper now. "For us," she clarified, and there it was, the part she cared about, the future we had been building, the one that now had something else standing in its way. I held her gaze, steady, unflinching. "For everything," I said, not narrowing it, not simplifying it, because that would have been a lie. She was quiet for a moment after that, processing, adjusting, deciding how much of this she was willing to accept, how much control she still believed she had. "Are you going to see her again?" she asked. And this time there was something beneath the question, something more personal. I did not hesitate. "Tomorrow," I answered, direct, because there was no reason to hide it. Her expression hardened slightly, the first visible crack in the composed image she maintained so carefully, and after that, she pressed. I exhaled slowly, my eyes drifting briefly to the window before returning to her. "That depends on what she tells me," I said. But even as I said it, I knew it was only part of the truth. Because whatever Emily said, whatever explanation she gave, it would not erase what I had seen, what I had recognized. Victoria watched me closely, and I could tell she understood that too. "You are already involved," she said quietly, not accusing, just stating what was obvious. I did not deny it, because denial would have been pointless. "Yes," I said, and the simplicity of the word carried more weight than anything else. The car continued down the street, the city lights reflecting against the glass, but inside, everything had shifted, not just in my life, but in the structure I had built around it, because for the first time in years, something existed outside of my control, something that had grown without me, something that did not recognize my authority or my rules, and I was not walking away from it, not this time, not when it had already found me. The next morning arrived too quickly, like the night had not been enough to contain everything that had changed. I stood across the street from the cafe on West 12th Street 10 minutes before the time she had given me, watching the glass windows reflect the early light. The city quieter now, softer, like it had not yet decided what kind of day it would become. I had not slept, not really. Every time I closed my eyes I saw them again, the way Liam had tilted his head, the way Noah had stayed closer to her side, the way they both looked at me like I was something familiar they could not name. I checked my watch, 9:57. I was never early for anything unless it mattered, and this did, more than I was ready to admit. The door to the cafe opened, and for a second, my breath caught in a way I did not expect. Emily stepped out first, scanning the street quickly, her posture alert, protective. Then she relaxed slightly when she saw me. The boys followed close behind her, bundled in light jackets, their small hands brushing against hers like they were used to staying close. I crossed the street without hesitation this time, each step measured, controlled, but there was something different beneath it now, something that did not come from authority, but from something far more personal. "You came," she said as I approached, her voice neutral, but her eyes searching. I stopped a few feet in front of them, close enough to see the details again, clearer in the daylight, clearer in a way that removed any doubt. "I said I would," I replied, my gaze shifting briefly to the boys. They were watching me again, more openly now, less guarded, like curiosity had begun to outweigh uncertainty. "Hi," Liam said first, his voice steady, like he had already decided I was not a threat. I nodded once, acknowledging him with the same respect I would give anyone. "Good morning," I said, my tone softer than it had been the night before. Noah stayed quiet, but his eyes did not leave me, observing, calculating in a way that mirrored something I knew too well. Emily glanced between us, then gestured toward the cafe door. "We should go inside," she said, and I nodded, because this was not a conversation for the sidewalk, not anymore. We stepped inside together, the warmth of the cafe wrapping around us, the low hum of voices and the smell of coffee grounding the moment in something almost normal. We found a table near the window, slightly removed from the others, private without being isolated, I pulled out a chair. For Emily, without thinking, an old habit I had not realized I still carried, she hesitated for a fraction of a second, then sat, the boys settling into their seats beside her. I took the chair across from them, positioning myself where I could see all three of them clearly, where nothing could be hidden in angles or distance. A server approached briefly, and Emily ordered for the boys, simple, familiar, the kind of routine that spoke of consistency, of a life built carefully over time. I listened without interrupting, taking in every detail, every piece of a world I had not been part of. When the server left, the table fell into a quiet that felt different from the night before, less chaotic, more deliberate. Emily looked at me, really looked this time, like she was no longer trying to avoid what was coming. You wanted the truth, she said, her voice steady, but there was something beneath it now, something heavier than before. I leaned back slightly, my eyes not leaving hers. Yes, I replied, and the simplicity of the word carried everything it needed to. She nodded once, like she had already prepared for this moment, like she had been rehearsing it in her head for years. Then her gaze shifted briefly to the boys before returning to me, and I knew, whatever she was about to say, it was going to change everything, not just for me, but for them, for all of us, because some truths do not just explain the past, they rewrite the future, and I was about to hear one that had already been shaping mine without my knowledge. Emily did not speak immediately, and that silence told me more than any words could have, because it meant she was choosing carefully, not just what to say, but how much of the truth she was willing to let exist between us. The boys shifted in their seats, the normal sounds of the café continuing around us, cups clinking, quiet conversations blending into the background, but none of it reached the table, because everything that mattered was right here, contained in the space between her and me. The night before you disappeared, she began finally, her voice steady but lower now, like she was pulling something out of a place she had kept sealed. You told me to stay away for a while. I held her gaze, not interrupting, because I remembered that night, not every detail, but enough, the tension, the urgency, the decisions I had made without explaining them fully, thinking I would come back and fix everything after. She continued, I did what you asked, I stayed away, I waited. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table, a small detail, but it did not escape me. But you did not come back when you said you would. There was no accusation in her voice, just fact, just the weight of time that had passed without answers. I exhaled slowly, because she was not wrong. Circumstances had pulled me into something I could not leave immediately, something that had taken longer than planned, longer than I had expected, but I had always intended to return. I came back, I said quietly, but even as I said it, I knew it was not enough, not in the way she needed it to be. She shook her head slightly. You came back too late, she replied, and there it was, the gap between intention and reality, between what I thought I had control over and what had already moved beyond it. My gaze dropped briefly to the boys, then back to her. You found out after I left, I said, not a question, but confirmation of what was already clear. She nodded once, slow, deliberate. 3 weeks later, she said, and the timing settled into place with a precision that left no room for doubt. I leaned back slightly, processing, recalculating everything I thought I knew about that time, about her disappearance, about the silence that followed. You could have told me, I said, my voice controlled but carrying more weight now, because this was the point where everything could have changed. She looked at me steadily, and this time there was no hesitation in her answer. No, she said, firm, final. I could not. I held her gaze, waiting, because there was more behind that, something she had not said yet, something that mattered. Why? I asked, simple, direct. She glanced at the boys, then back at me, and I saw it again, that same conflict, that same line she had been holding for years, because by the time I knew, she said slowly, I also knew what your world had become while you were gone. Her words were careful, but they carried implication, not accusation, just reality as she had seen it, and I was not going to bring them into that, she added, her voice softer now, but no less certain. I absorbed that, every part of it, not dismissing it, not rejecting it, just understanding the choice she had made from her perspective. Even if I did not agree with it, even if I would have chosen differently, I looked at Liam and Noah again, at the way they sat there, unaware of the full weight of what was being decided around them, their world stable, defined by her, by the life she had built. So you decided for all of us, I said quietly, not harsh, just stating what it was. She met my gaze without flinching. Yes, she said, and the honesty of it was sharper than anything else she could have said. The table fell silent again after that, but this time it was different, not uncertain, not unresolved, but full, like the truth had finally taken its place between us. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on the table, my focus narrowing to her, to them, to what came next. Then now I decide too, I said, my voice calm, but carrying a certainty that did not leave room for doubt. Her breath caught just slightly. I saw it, because she understood what that meant, not control, not force, but presence, involvement, a place in something she had built without me. I am not walking away from them, I added, and the words felt different than anything I had said before, not a command, not a strategy, something else entirely, something personal, something that did not come from power but from recognition, from the simple, undeniable fact that they were mine as much as they were hers. Emily held my gaze, and for the first time, she did not argue, did not push back immediately, because she knew this was no longer something she could carry alone, not after today, not after the truth had been spoken out loud. And as Liam looked between us again, his eyes thoughtful, searching, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else. This was not about reclaiming what I had lost, it was about learning how to belong to something that had grown without me, and that was a different kind of power entirely.